Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. We are going to wait a couple more minutes for people to join. Okay. Thank you, everyone, again for joining us today. My name is Carlotta Paltrinieri. I am the Senior Researcher of Towards a National Collection, which is a 5-year program that is funded through AHRC and UKRI. This is our international seminar series, which is a series of events that invite guests from international initiatives that are inspiring our program, and they're proving to be leaders in the aspects that we care about the most. For example, we had the first 2 events were about building a national collection. So for example, we had Digital New Zealand, and we had Japan Search, and then we had the German Digital Library and Cultura Italia. Our third event was a roundtable on copyright and IPR and open access issues. And we had 5 international speakers that shared with us their expertise on and their experience with IPR for the GLAM sector. And today is our 4th event, and it's going to be about digital engagement and strategies that initiatives have used to attract and to keep engaged their users. And with us today are Medhavi Gandhi, Caitlin Haynes, and Emily Cain. Medhavi is from the Heritage Lab. She's the founder of the Heritage Lab, while Caitlin and Emily are both from the Smithsonian, and particularly they're from the Smithsonian Transcription Center. So today we're going to hear from them, their experience and their projects. And after that, there's going to be a Q&A session. A little bit of housekeeping. We would like to keep the questions at the end of the presentations. And usually what we like to do, if you would like to ask your question live, which we encourage to do, you can either stick a Q in the chat and I'll call on you, or you can raise your hand with the raise your hand button. Whereas if you prefer to just type in your question, I can read it out for you. What else? We are recording the event and is also streaming on YouTube. So for our YouTube viewers, feel free to write your questions in the chat, and Colin Medhavi will make sure to tell me the questions and we will ask them live. Colin, I forgot anything, or is it everything? I think it's everything.
I think that's everything. If you don't want to be on the recording, don't put on your video.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'd like to invite Medhavi to share her screen and her experience with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carlotta and Colin, for having me. It's an honor really to be here with everybody, but also I'm looking forward to learning. I have followed the series before, so it's really nice to sort of have these notes that we're exchanging with each other. So I'll just start with sharing my screen. And just a second before I go full screen here. So really glad to be talking about the Heritage Lab today. The Heritage Lab actually started as a project in schools. It started with taking museum collections to school to integrate with.
Oh, yes, there you go.
Sorry, okay. So I'll just repeat a little. So the Heritage Lab actually started as a project in schools where the idea was to take museum
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
No problem at all. Right. So museum collections in relation with the curriculum and sort of explore a different way of learning, called it creative inquiry. So students were able to analyze different sources, archives, before coming up with a certain answer rather than rote learning, which is more common when students are learning history. So it actually really started with that, and the web content were mere reflections on what was happening in the classroom. And there were also notes for teachers to follow up, and also for teachers who couldn't attend these sessions, or for schools that we geographically couldn't really reach within the Indian subcontinent. So it started as that. So yes, the broad vision, of course, we knew one day where we are right now. We did want to be here and, of course, beyond. But this idea was always there, that we wanted to be that one resource platform for Indian collections in GLAMs worldwide, so that people could know, people could see, and a lot of people who cannot travel to the UK, US, other countries, Europe, will have access to the artworks, etc., that have value for Indian cultural heritage learning as well. So to start with our main audience, I mean, we can always say that our audience is everybody who is interested in cultural heritage. But of course, the content is geared first towards a very specific audience. And we started with educators, students, and parents by giving them resources, by giving them self-learning packs, by giving them things that they, like DIY things that they could take to the museum themselves. This was supplemented by holding a lot of workshops at museums, inviting teachers and students there, and then sort of taking them through the content that we had online by giving them little cards, which sometimes had links, follow-up activities online. The other set of audience that we wanted to target were GLAM professionals. The idea was to first create a community online and then connect them with GLAM professionals so that museums and people could really have these conversations together. Conversations like Ask a Curator. So, when we say Ask a Curator, in the first year itself, we saw that a large round of the questions were from within the community to the community. So it wasn't from a teacher, it wasn't from a student, it wasn't from a person working at a corporate MNC. I mean, they didn't have any questions. So we wanted to change that, and we wanted to see how we can facilitate these conversations. And the first step really was to bring museum professionals onto platforms like Twitter. Twitter is popular in India as a social media platform, but for GLAM professionals specifically, not so much. I mean, Facebook takes more prominence there. So it was also, we created things like the social media handbook to familiarize GLAM professionals with the different audiences they would meet at different platforms. So these conversations could be more meaningful, really. The third audience, the third set that we were looking to target were experience seekers. This is like a broad set again. Okay, so this again, there's no age group here. There is, in this photograph itself, there are doctors, there are students, there's an archaeologist that I can recognize. That there are like different people in this picture. But this particular picture was actually a workshop, not a workshop. It was more of a walk, an interactive walk at a museum in the city, which was basically based on a book. And the book was to do with readings in Indian art history, which sounds like, okay, if you're not into art history, you might not be interested in the book. So we actually wanted to bridge that gap and sort of just highlight the elements and the stories in the book through this interactive walk. And we had post-its, we had different kind of things happening in the gallery as well. Digitally, how did this sort of work out? The idea was to then direct people to different posts and things that already existed on our website about this particular gallery and let them leave their experiences as well. So a lot of these people, as you see, would have been first-time museum visitors or people who don't really visit museums all that often, especially in India, but when they're traveling, they do try to visit museums. Also, when we are visiting museums, the idea is to just see what can we do over here. And the whole the whole museum is something that everybody wants to see. And we try to tell them that not to see the whole museum. But it's through these little snippets that we give online that people try to familiarize. If I have to say, for the Heritage Lab, the big challenge was, it wasn't that people are not going to museums. The bigger challenge was that people didn't know what to expect at museums. There's the culture of going to a cultural institution was what was missing in the busy lives that people lead. So I think we wanted to bring that change first in our audience by letting them feel welcome, by letting them feel familiar with what they might see and not feel alienated or inhibited by any, art language or anything that is commonly used at a museum space usually. So we did have, if you see the content, it's interactive. So we built a lot of interactive content, especially starting 2017. I know the museum jigsaws and crosswords took off during the pandemic. Museums everywhere were doing this. But it was in 2017 that we worked with a museum, which is the Salarjung Museum, which has a huge crowd that comes to the museum. It's lots of people who come to the museum. And they were at that point where they didn't even think that digital would be important because there's so many people walking into the museum. What we wanted to do was for the people who weren't visiting the museum or who couldn't travel to the museum, explore it using Google Street View. So I'm just going to minimize my screen and actually take you there, just to give you a glimpse of what we did. So this is just a simple, had the instructions and you said you want to start the tour. And it was literally like a quiz. So you see that there is a set of chairs and what material are they made of, and you literally have to like zoom in there and sort of read the label and see the chairs really carefully before you type in the answer over here, and only then is the next question presented to you. So yeah, that's the kind of interactive content that we started to build on with museums right from 2017. The other thing was that how do we encourage people to lend their skill to a museum or learn a new skill at a museum without being necessarily lovers of art or history? So things like what photographers can learn from art museums really worked. This was a guest post written by someone, but it was followed up with like photographers actually going to a museum, clicking things, and then participating in a contest that was held, which again was something where we were giving away Instax cameras and all. So it really sort of created that circle of on-site as well as online engagement for people. But then what do we do when people visit the museum? We wanted to hear from them. We wanted to know what they felt about it. So this isn't, yes, a lot of these experiences, there are platforms like TripAdvisor where people leave comments. There are Facebook posts that people make. But we wanted to start sharing walks and trails which people have created. This isn't a vision that we have completely still realized. There is a long way to go for that. And I think we'll have to prepare a lot technologically before people can start creating digital stories with their own trails and share it with friends. But this is a start, and we have seen people contribute their pictures and their own voice to what they saw at the museum. It's their narrative. So that's also something that we're seeing is picking up slowly, and we really want to sort of push here as well. And one of the main audiences that we have absolutely loved engaging and interacting with are people who love books and love to read and love to travel. Interestingly, in India, we realized that while there is a lot of art historians writing books, there are a lot of travel writers writing about, they're writing about travel places. There's also historical fiction. But somehow this audience was not translating into a museum-going audience. It's something that we saw that there was a disconnect. We do take our surveys, so we realized that this was a glaring disconnect. So we worked with a publisher. Interestingly, the book was about women in the Mughal space. The book was actually called Daughters of the Sun, which is one of our favorite books now. But it was one of the books for the first time it spotlighted women in the Mughal era. And because it sort of resonated with people, there were people who were traveling to places like this Noor Mahal, and we asked people to contribute and share their stories of places that they might have been, visited, but didn't know that these were built by women. So there were a lot of these stories that we collected on Twitter, on different social media platforms, which actually sort of ended up becoming full-fledged stories that people could read. Those were our planned audiences. That's where we knew that, okay, we're going the right direction. Sometimes we felt we were going slow, but we were going in the right direction. What was absolutely surprising and absolutely delightful, on the right side, you see a tweet by a very prominent person in India, Mr. Prashant Bhushan. He's in the legal justice system. He works with that. And he actually tweeted this using the post that we had created based on paintings as a point to, I mean, it was a part of his debate with the government. So we now started to see that artworks and museum objects can be used in conversations that are politically important. It can be used in context. It can be used to drive conversations about today. And this is like a spectacular example of that. We didn't expect this. We had only expected it to be, shared with a happy Diwali, festive time post. That was our expectation of it. On the other hand, we also had something that Mr. Dalrymple, who's from the industry, shared. So again, art historians, people who know art, write about art or write fiction, this is not our audience, because our audience is the person who was just starting out or just was new to this field. So it was very encouraging to have him share something and know that, okay, this kind of thing is also being picked up. What we realize is that the kind of post he picked up and a lot of others that have got shared are well-researched content pieces that have layers of research to them. And that's how a whole new segment was born on the Heritage Lab, where we actually sort of go deeper, give classroom insights. I mean, in one post, we sort of start to give different kinds of lenses that people can view it through. Another big surprise this year, we started with Indian educators, but this year we sort of saw a lot of people come in from here. We unfortunately do not know which pieces of content got picked up, so I really don't know what to do there. But we saw a lot of Moodle courses from different universities abroad linking back to content and picking up content from their a Spanish website spotlighting our games. So I think this gives us a good idea of the global audience that we still can tap in. At this point, I must sort of just share that when I started the Heritage Lab, and first at every stage, we were taking a lot of feedback from everybody. A lot of people told me that this kind of a thing is not going to work in India because it's very Western. The concept is very Western, and you might have more Western readers, which is good. And this is the kind of model you can apply to it. But I'm very proud to say that even today, 70% of our audience comes from India, which is also disturbing because this is a 4% drop from last year. But I mean, earlier it was 74% of our audience coming in from India. But we hope that, I mean, this is our main aim, to keep the larger set of audiences Indian and cater to this set of audiences a lot. So if I have to talk about the access roadmap, I spoke about how we wanted to make these digital collections across GLAMs, the Indian digital collections, accessible to everybody. Just reflecting on our journey over the years. It started with discovery and just noticing something. In fact, if one goes through the archives, some of our posts are actually just things that the Met had started to put up, for example, about India, just those with the same text crediting the Met for it. So it was just about discovering that this exists. The other thing, of course, started to become things like, how are we creating discussion around these? So there were a lot of Instagram polls, a lot of discussion on Instagram stories, a lot of debates. A lot of our content ideas actually came from our engagement with the Instagram community. All of the content that we create, we try not to share it on Insta. And Instagram is not where we get our readership from. Facebook, Twitter is not where we get our majority of readers from. So these social media channels isn't what we used for spreading the content in terms of leadership, but yes, it was more of listening. We tried to use these platforms as listening tools, and also trying to ask the public what are their questions about certain topics in history or art. The two gray areas, participation and co-creating, these are gray because we're still working on it. There's still a lot in this field that we are working on. Things like the art and feminism campaign is something that we're very, very passionate about, and our communities really got used to it. The beauty of it is that the Heritage Lab, of course, runs its own campaign as well, but it also encourages GLAMs to host their own campaigns. So the idea is to not just put content from museums online, on Wikipedia, but also have people come and participate and write about these. And that's where we see like it's a kind of a campaign that also told us that people were wanting to do more than just consume content. They wanted to be participants, they wanted to volunteer, they wanted to do something. So we've noticed that even though people pick up the skill of Wikipedia editing during the art and feminism campaign, this continues over the year on different topics. So this is something that we're really happy to have been part of. In 2020, we actually worked with a museum in India, the DAG Museum, to release 13 artworks under open access. I know 13 is a really small number to hear maybe, but this is a big deal because this has not happened in India before. And also because I think largely our responsibility was also to let the audience, the larger public, know what can they do with open access artwork. People in the creative space still know what licenses mean and what to do, but with the larger set of audiences, not really. So this is also a way to enable this creator community. Knowing that platforms like Instagram, etc., have already put people on that creator, that habit of becoming a creator. Everybody's a content creator now. So we wanted to see what people create using artwork. So yes, we expected that a lot of people will make GIFs because it's a GIF competition. But what we realized when we took a post-event feedback was that 65% of the people, nearly 65% of the people were first-time gift makers. This was an opportunity for GLAMs, for the Heritage Lab, to work with their audience in sharing a digital skill. So we decided that going onwards, we will be working on a lot of programs, a lot of workshops where we are sharing a certain digital skill, not just Wikipedia editing, gift making, meme making. And that actually continued throughout 2020. We actually conducted a lot of these gift and meme making workshops, which led to the meme maker on the Heritage Lab. So we now actually have a meme maker. We couldn't figure out how to do a gift maker because anyway, Giphy exists, right? We don't need a gift maker. But we did need a meme maker because Indian art can be difficult to find if you're not very well versed with the right terms of what you're looking for and which institutions have it and which ones have the right license. So we've actually curated that set and we're putting it out here. In fact, this month, we're working with a school with more than 200 students from grade 5 to grade 12 on a meme making competition on the theme of art and science. So this is really exciting to us to see the kind of possibilities others also see when they see tools like the meme maker. So it's not just fun, but it's also educational and there's a new skill there. But everything is not digitally created. We also have artists who are looking at open access art. This one is from the Cleveland Museum, which we had shared on Instagram for Mother's Day. And then someone actually recreated an embroidery piece and shared it with us. So we have thought of now sharing a new segment on our website featuring such creators so that there is slowly a creation of a community of creators on the website as well. So yeah, like if I go back now, I mean, our audience never really, that was just not the plan, right? But now we're doing this as well. So it's just to see how people push you and sort of let you imagine different things. It's also the audience that is actually giving these ideas. But yeah, what worked, what didn't work, I just want to share that we did try different tools in the middle. So I want to share this one thing. It took us months to work on this particular artist, and it was such a failure. it is disappointing, but I wouldn't term it a complete failure. It taught us some things. We first wanted this to be a short post that said 3 things to know about this legendary artist. It was meant to target people who don't know much about him. That we went deeper and deeper, and then we ended up creating a game in the middle of it over here. Let's just get to the game. You see, the article became so long that the game itself lost steam. And a lot of people would just, I mean, the feedback that we got was that, oh, it was a good read, but we couldn't read the whole thing. Or that, some who tried to play the game had not read the earlier thing. So I think we did a lot over here. So the idea was for people to simply see these paper artworks that he created and then sort of make their own version over here by just using triangles and shapes and doing their thing over here. So this royally failed because I think we were expecting too much and making them do a lot over here. So that's something to remember as well, I think, for us, that we should sort of separate these. We tried to learn, and so we have these different research-driven pieces which are really long. So we do have a TLDR disclaimer in our newsletters when we send it out that if you're not reading, this is what it includes. But this is a whole new segment on the website. That these are long-form content pieces directed towards schools, which have a classroom connection button in the end, a discussion. If there are people who want to know more, they would sort of dig more, and we have all the resources given, and the layout has been changed accordingly to make it visually easy for someone to know what they're looking for and how they will find it. So the idea, yes, also was to just interrupt this one-way flow of conversation. A complaint that people have had for really long, I'm sorry, I think I've gone on too long, but I'm just going to wrap this up now. But a complaint that everybody has had was about commenting. We did not allow the comments feature for a very, very long time. Also to avoid, there were a lot of issues with the comments, moderation, spam, a lot of these things. And we also wanted to establish a way of commenting that we finally have come up with. This is going to be specifically for schools first, though it's open site-wide. But the idea would be to filter and tab their comments, as you see over here, so as to encourage a civil discourse and engagement online. This is something that school students still have to know how to substantiate their arguments about something, how to express their views, give those links. So it sort of allows that. But basically what we're doing is, when we're giving a piece of information or a resource, we're also introducing inline commenting so that people can straight away get to the point and put forth their, it's a debate that you're raising, so people put their opinion down, and then we sort of see in a tabbed way how students are responding, whether they're responding with images, whether they're responding with a reasoned argument, with a link. So all of that, and those are hopefully going to be part of their classroom assignments now. That's just like a more zoomed in way of looking at it. So yeah, that's the end of it. And we are still working on these things and more ways of putting things together. So thank you for giving me such a patient listen.
Thank you, Medhavi. That was great. And it's great to see that things are always in progress and there's always lots of learning to do. And we are very aware that since we are at the beginning of our program, there's a lot that we need to learn. And I was particularly impressed with this idea of users not just being content creator, but the force that is behind the digital innovation, which I think it's one lesson to learn from the beginning. So thank you so much. And Emily and Caitlin, the floor is yours now.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for having us. I'm Caitlin Haynes. I am the program coordinator here at the Smithsonian Transcription Center. And I will just say I took so many notes. That was awesome. Medhavi, thank you so much for sharing all of that about the Heritage Lab. We chatted a little before we started today about how we were really excited to sort of hear some new ideas. And we will definitely be thinking about a lot of the incredible engagement efforts that you all have done. So just amazing. So let me share my screen really fast and bring up our presentation. And here we go. All right, so I'm going to quickly kind of cover the background of what Transcription Center is and how we sort of established our initial digital engagement strategies and how we've sort of developed them over the past 5 or 6 years. And then I will hand things over to Emily to talk a little bit about how our digital engagement strategies and communities have changed during the pandemic. Okay, so the Transcription Center is the Smithsonian Institution's largest crowdsourcing and digital volunteering platform. So it was established in 2013 as part of our Office of the Chief Information Officer here in the here in the Smithsonian, excuse me. That's like our IT unit. And it is just a website, as you can see, that is available 24/7. Every day of the year, available for all kind of curious learners and individuals to connect with our digitized collections from across the Smithsonian and help us make them more accessible, readable, and discoverable through collaborative transcription and review. So over the past, I'm not sure what just happened to my computer there, but I'm like somehow taking screenshots. There we go. Okay. Over the past 8 years, Transcription Center has really grown exponentially. So since 2013, we have collaboratively transcribed almost 900,000 pages of content from across the Smithsonian's many different museums, libraries, and archives. We've transcribed content in 26 different languages, dating from the 16th century to the present day. And we have done all of this with more than 54,000 digital volunteers. So who is our community? So unlike other on-site volunteering programs here at the Smithsonian, our volunteers are welcome to participate as much or as little as they'd like. So we have no minimum participation requirement. And one of the things that we have always prioritized here in Transcription Center, and that we've received a lot of positive feedback about, is that in Transcription Center, again, unlike our on-site volunteering opportunities here at the Smithsonian, our volunteers can sort of engage or unengage with us directly as little or as much as they would like. So they can maintain any level of anonymity that they're comfortable with. They can never talk to us, or they can talk to us every day. It's completely up to them. So there's, some sort of general demographic information that we know about our community at large, but the specific information about who these people are, what drives their interest in Transcription Center, what experiences they take away from digital volunteering on our platform are very sort of contingent on how much they communicate with us. That said, we do know that we have volunteers from over 75 different countries, participation from more than 150 university colleges and high schools, not only here in the United States, but around the world, participation from corporations, from other nonprofits and cultural heritage organizations, and that our largest user group is between 18 and 35, which has really surprised us over the years, but has remained pretty consistent. Excuse me. Transcription Center activity by all of these volunteers ensures that the Smithsonian's collections are not only more easily discovered and accessed, but it also provides our dispersed and diverse user communities the opportunity to engage with our content on a personal level, which leads to a variety of new discoveries for us and for them. So Smithsonian curators have been able to locate really specific information about their collections for museum exhibits. We've been able to connect collections inside and outside the Smithsonian that we didn't know were connected before. And then we've also been able to connect individual researchers with ancestors in the historical record, including our own Smithsonian Secretary, Secretary Bunch, who has located his ancestors in the Smithsonian's Freedmen's Bureau records that we share with the National Archives. So how did this all kind of come about? What we really want to focus on today, obviously, is the ways in which our team has sort of developed, maintained, and continued to grow and support this really huge user community, both inside and outside the Smithsonian, and how our approaches and strategies have really changed and adapted over the years, particularly during 2020. So in the beginning, again, in 2013, when we first established the Transcription Center, we sort of knew that this was going to be a program centered around public engagement, right? The entire point of all of this was to figure out various ways to sort of maximize and capitalize on all the incredible digitization work that was being done around the institution. But it's also a way to provide public engagement that didn't have to be on site. So for us to connect learners worldwide with the Smithsonian's treasures without leaving their home, right? In a way that sort of fit their needs. But that said, it was still a pilot project. So in 2013, there was nothing else like this at the Smithsonian, and there weren't that many programs sort of otherwise in the cultural heritage world on a massive scale like this for us to really learn from in a useful way. So we developed this in 2013, knowing that people would be interested because we had the Smithsonian brand behind us, but not really knowing who would be interested, how or why they would be interested, and sort of how we would kind of continue to engage and motivate and support them. So we built the Transcription Center and people did come, but early sign-on and participation was really largely sort of based around this novelty and excitement of this being kind of like a new project at the Smithsonian, right? And all of the flashiness that comes with that. The question of how to keep users engaged long-term, sustain participation, and build a real community was a little bit more challenging. So we developed a two-pronged approach to digital engagement in those early years. So the first prong of this is this sort of consistent, continuous communication and outreach. So we developed monthly or biweekly newsletter campaigns, e-newsletters. We developed social media accounts and sort of various strategies and plans for these social media accounts that included a lot of sort of continuous and consistent messaging to our internal and external audiences about new projects that we have in Transcription Center, our various tips and tricks for participating and transcribing, deeper dives into the collections, into our staff, and into our volunteers, coordinated blog posts across the institution, and various different live or pre-recorded sorts of webinars or collections tours, et cetera. So you can sort of see some of these on the screen. We, of course, over the years have also definitely taken advantage of the collaborations and partnerships that we have around the institution to draw support and to learn and share even more with our communities. So you can see here in 2020, right before the pandemic, we did a big campaign transcribing with our secretary, and it was massively successful for Black History Month. And we got a lot of new users that way. And of course, sort of encouraged our own collaborations with our Smithsonian leadership, which is never a bad thing, right? That sort of second pronged approach that we developed to outreach and digital engagement is a more sort of structured experiences and targeted campaigns that we did on sort of an ad hoc basis as needed. So things like diving deeper into particular topics or projects with staff, doing kinds of week-long or month-long review challenges or other types of sort of engagements, focusing on particular campaigns across the institution or outside of the institution, excuse me, or hosting or participating in special events or collections tours or transcribathons that were largely on site and in person. So this combined approach of structured outreach efforts and everyday engagement practices really offered our increasingly diverse community of digital volunteers multiple ways to dive into Smithsonian collections. So I know there are some familiar names on the participant list, which is awesome in this webinar. So you all have heard me say this again, but I'll say it louder and as many times as possible. But I really strongly believe that diverse communities deserve diverse engagement. So all of our volunteers are coming at this. Of course, they have a shared interest, right? That's what's bringing them to Transcription Center. But these are people all over the world with various backgrounds, with various skill sets, with various reasons for wanting to participate or being interested in learning more about the Smithsonian. And so we need to sort of meet them where they are and respect the fact that they're different. And that's a good thing. And we should celebrate that. And so we need to offer various ways for them to engage that aligns with their interests, their needs, and sort of meets them on a level with which they're comfortable. So this idea that, again, our volunteers and our public community can be as engaged or unengaged as they want has really served us well. And then this idea that we are continuously prioritizing and encouraging and maintaining diverse and different varied types of engagement has really served us well. Equally important as we grew Transcription Center was the sort of various avenues that we were sustaining for communication between our volunteers and various Smithsonian staff. So we really noticed early on, and this has continued to inform all of our work, that communication with our volunteers is crucial to the success of everything that we do, because we not only need to be supporting and encouraging our participants, but we need them and we want them to help us troubleshoot issues on the platform, and sort of improve and enhance our evolving workflows and practices. So from the simplest changes on the site to the most complex technical developments, the volunteers must be involved, as they are the ones being directly impacted. And our role as community managers is really sort of being that in between, that messenger, that bridge, that communication channel between our Smithsonian staff, our technical developers, our collections managers, and our public. And so being able to sort of listen and transfer both of those sort of messages across different user communities, internal and external, has been really important to us as we developed our program. So all of these things, all of these strategies have worked really well for us as we've grown Transcription Center over the past 7 years, and have continued to inform everything we do during the pandemic. But the pandemic has also massively changed everything about who our community is, and what we know about them, and how we are sort of meeting their needs and approaching our strategies. So with that, I will hand it over to my amazing colleague, Emily Cain, our community coordinator, who had, I don't know if I want to say joy, but who had the joy of joining us in the middle of the pandemic in November of 2020. So I will hand it over to you, Emily.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin, and thank you, everybody. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions, so I'm going to rush through my section here, and then y'all can let us know which parts you'd like to circle back to via your questions. So you can go on to the next slide there, Caitlin. Thank you. So like Caitlin mentioned, in 2020, our engagements, it increased by a great deal. As you can imagine, people during the pandemic have been looking for ways to fill their time online. And so after building a pretty steady community for the first 7 years of Transcription Center's existence, we had slowly made our way up to 14,000 volunteers, which is a pretty healthy community. And then from a period of March of 2020 to March of 2021, we went from that 14,000 that we had slowly built over time up to over 51,000, which is really rapid, really overwhelming growth, right? And with that growth came higher productivity. Our community was transcribing and reviewing over 5,000 pages of archival material per month, which is great. But it also created sort of increased demand for projects and content, which required that we work more closely with our colleagues across the institution to meet that demand. And it also came along with increased demand for engagement opportunities. So what I really want to focus on in the short time that I have is not just that the community grew, but also that it changed an incredible amount in ways that we didn't expect. So it wasn't just more of the same thing we had been coming to expect, but on a much larger scale. It was actually a totally different ballgame, and we've learned a lot from that experience and are still learning every day. So we'll start with who were our volunteers originally, right? So before March of 2020, who was that core group of 14,000 people? Well, like Caitlin mentioned, a lot of our volunteers we don't know a lot about because they like the anonymity and the sort of individual experience that comes along with transcribing from home. But in terms of our most consistently active volunteers and most communicative digital volunteers that we knew well, we mostly considered them to be self-motivated participants, and that was the majority before March of 2020. So these are people, and they happen to be primarily between the ages of 25 and 65, who individually sought out the Transcription Center as a way to sort of gain knowledge, to give back in their own small way, and to directly engage with Smithsonian collections. So many of them had an interest or background in history, science, cultural heritage, and many of them even have professional experience in proofreading and editing. So these are exactly the type of people. They're passionate about the content and they're meticulous about the details. that are perfect for this type of volunteer community. They're really the ideal volunteers. And so the idea of that demographic changing too much seems pretty scary. But we have learned, as you can see from some of these quotes from our volunteers here, we've gotten really incredible, rewarding engagement by reaching people beyond that core group throughout the course of the pandemic, people that we wouldn't normally be reaching. So I want to talk first about the change in our community in terms of we had started with a core group of people who were really well versed in our content, in our instructions. They understood the process. They had a personal investment in doing that process really rigorously and in a detail-oriented way. We now are in a position, of course, with that sort of rapid growth, where we have much more. We have many, many more new users than we do experienced users, which has meant that's a pretty major dynamic shift. And it has meant that we need to sort of analyze the way that we have been giving our instructions, and we need to pay closer attention to the content that's being produced through Transcription Center and the way that new volunteers are understanding our instructional content as well. So what we've been learning is that these new groups of people who are joining us, they understand our mission and our guidelines much differently, and sometimes misunderstand. And that has created a lot of opportunities for us to sort of totally rethink the way that we talk about the process, the way that we talk about our goals, and the way that we sort of lay out our instructions, both from sort of a content production way and also from a user experience level on our website, which has been a really exciting opportunity for us to sort of reevaluate. It's also given us an opportunity, even with this increased engagement from new users, it's given us opportunities to build stronger relationships with that existing core group of volunteers who are really well versed in our instructions and have a lot of insight into the process. Because as our community has changed and the community's needs have changed, we have increasingly needed to rely on those people that we know really well, who are invested in the process and who can see, because they transcribe every day, they can see exactly what the new volunteers are understanding and not understanding, common mistakes that are being made, things that are being done better. And so we have increased those relationships with them, both by forming sort of a new group of volunteers within the system that have elevated permissions, and also by increasing just our day-to-day check-ins and communications with them. So they report a lot of the new behavior that they're seeing on the site, and we have found new ways to respond to that. We've also been able to increase our communications with these new volunteers by developing a targeted outreach approach. So anytime we're finding new users who are sort of veering off of the path, we're finding new ways to give them, specifically to reach out to individual people and give them sort of targeted instructional content that meets their needs, and work with them one-on-one to better understand what the program is looking for and how they can help us meet those goals. But another way that our community has changed is that a lot of these new users are not just coming in for the first time, they have entirely different motivations for participating in the process. So where before people were coming to Transcription Center primarily because they were interested in the content, many of our new participants are coming to Transcription Center because they are required to do a certain number of volunteer hours. And they may also be incredibly interested in the content, or they may find that they are surprised to learn that they turn out to be incredibly interested in the content. But they do have a different primary reason for approaching us. And so the two main groups that fall into this, this new required participation category are students who are looking for service learning activities, either for a specific classroom activity or as a sort of overall graduation or scholarship requirement. And also corporations who are looking for ways that they can give back and also do team building exercises together. And so both of these are communities that we didn't expect to reach, corporations especially, but that has allowed us to build out a pretty robust sponsorship program that allows us to kind of meet those needs, connect with new people, and also develop resources for Transcription Center. And of course, students, education is the Smithsonian's primary mission. And so that's a group of people that we've been trying to reach for a very long time. And the pandemic and the transition to digital learning has finally made it so that we can have those conversations and we can develop resources for educators. One last thing that I want to talk about, and then we'll move on, is the new formats for engagement. So it's not just that the people we're working with are different, it's that we all live in this strange digital space now. And so what we're finding are that the sorts of on-demand engagements that were being requested can, of course, only be hosted digitally right now. And so doing transcription events together over Zoom, we have found to actually be a really good fit for our program that we may not have considered before, and that our volunteers and users may not have been prepared skill-wise to, meet us halfway at before. But in doing these sorts of transcription events online instead of in person, we can do breakout rooms, we can share our screens, and it really allows us to sort of meet everybody's needs and also to have a broader geographic reach. And sort of one-on-one instructional sessions with people than we ever would have been able to do before. And so that has inspired us to transition to a lot of our other engagements, not on-demand engagements, but regular monthly engagements that are content focused, that are discussion focused, Q&A focused. All of those we're hosting virtually now too. And that started as a necessity, but it's something that we're looking forward to doing well into the future, because it turns out there are a great many benefits to that. And it turns out also that by being able to interact with people more and get feedback from people as they're doing this activity, and be able to see their facial expressions as they're describing the discoveries that they make, is also allowing us to think a lot about what people need, what people are excited by, and how we adjust our messaging, not just in these events, but then also how we can adjust the messaging on our website to better align with the way that we would speak to somebody in person. And so I will leave that there and pass it back to Caitlin for lessons learned, because I want to make sure that we leave time for everyone's questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emily. I know we're rushing through this a little bit, and if it's useful, I will pop up our lessons learned back up on the screen. But I want to go ahead and open it up for questions so that we have time for that, because we could talk all day. I know I could talk all day and would love to talk all day about the things that we are constantly learning and changing and adapting regarding digital engagement and our communications and collaborations with our large and ever-growing volunteer community.
Thank you so much, both. It was incredible. And while we're waiting for audience to warm up, I see that we have a question that is very quick, but I think it's useful to repeat. S is asking if the platform was created by you. Was you created it yourself? I'm assuming it was a question for the Smithsonian team.
Yes, so Transcription Center's platform is hosted on Drupal, which of course is available to everybody, but our actual code base for the transcription functionality itself was homegrown, and that's largely because we needed it. Our technical developers needed it and wanted it to work and communicate sort of automatically on the front end and the back end with our internal Smithsonian databases, which are also homegrown. So for that reason, it wouldn't necessarily be useful for it to be like an open source kind of code. That said, that larger question of how we built Transcription Center from a technical perspective is one that we get a lot, and we are always happy to have conversations individually with different organizations who are interested in learning more about that, and sort of talking shop, so to speak, with our developers about how that works. So feel free to reach out to us. We'll put our email in the chat as well.
Thank you, Caitlin. There's another question for now, so I'm going to ask a question that might seem a little unrelated, but I guess it's central to the whole issue of engaging users, but also to how to deal with content. So my question is, how do you deal with problematic or, I guess, controversial content? And especially, how do users play a role in that? Do you have users that, as feedback, they signal something that they didn't think it was appropriate, or how is the content selected for some of the activities? So anything you would like to share with us?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we are very sensitive to, and we're constantly talking about amongst ourselves. But we feel really strongly across the Smithsonian and here in Transcription Center that we don't want to be censoring historical content, right? And the point of transcription is to maintain historical accuracy. So we ask that our volunteers transcribe exactly as they see in the original document, like even maintaining spelling and grammatical errors. That said, we are also very cognizant of the fact that a lot of historical material is traumatic and problematic and contains a lot of sensitive or outdated terminology, or offensive content, or traumatic stories, etc. And so, for one, everything that comes into Transcription Center is reviewed by the participating Smithsonian units and collections managers first, right? So it's not up to myself or Emily to bring content into Transcription Center. That's up to the collection stewards that are in charge of that content. So they're never going to put anything in Transcription Center that isn't already online, and they've already figured out those rights in general, but Transcription Center does magnify that stuff additionally, and we recognize that. So we have a number of disclaimers on the site about the need for maintaining historical accuracy, but also acknowledging the sort of difficult nature of historical content, and encouraging everyone to review our policies Smithsonian-wide on cultural sensitivity and access, but then also to reach out to our team if they're ever concerned about anything. We also have additional disclaimers on some of our most sort of challenging content. So we transcribed the Freedmen's Bureau records, which contain a lot of specific information and experiences of formerly enslaved individuals. And because of that, we really try and acknowledge the sort of emotional labor that goes on to exploring those collections in an intimate way. And we like to provide as much contextual information about that historical background as we can to make sure that we are providing our volunteers and our public with enough information and resources to better understand why the terminology might be the way it is, why these stories are so important that we're preserving and sharing this information exactly as it appears in the historical record, so that we're making sure that this history, whether joyful or traumatic, is preserved, and that these stories can be shared, so that we can better understand this history. But it is something that we're constantly working on, and sort of thinking more critically about what is or isn't included in Transcription Center is something that we're always sort of thinking about, talking about with our internal colleagues and with our digital volunteers.
Thank you. That was very thorough. Medhavi, would you like to also come in?
Right. I think in the kind of climate that the digital climate that we all function in, which is highly polarized sometimes, there can be a distortion of facts, of just views, also like just using some material to only substantiate a certain argument and not taking in the entire view is a problem that we have seen. So we do try to provide all the resources and all the materials as well now. I mean, initially, this actually came as an afterthought. It was something that we learned in due course, that if we are putting out an argument, we actually just now state it, give the right ebook, give everything right there for everybody to see all of it before they sort of start to use it on social media without context. So I think that's something that we've learned and sort of worked around. But I think going forward, this is also the reason why we want to do the school project around the whole commenting and then choosing certain debates and then seeing which kind of comments and responses fared best, because I think it's also about the next generation taking responsibility for the kind of conversations that spread on the internet, right? So that's what we're trying to do, but I'm sure we have a lot to learn in this part.
Everybody does. So it's not just you. So we have 3 questions in the chat. There are 2 about reuse and copyright, which is a very hot topic. So the first question, I guess it's applicable to both projects. What's about copyright? If anyone would like to use some of the online documents, such as photos, would you like to comment on your copyright policies? Medhavi or Smithsonian?
I'll go first. I think we do put in, we try to use whatever public domain and CC0 content that is there. Usually the license is specified, but if not, we do have a terms of use page where people do write to us asking if they're able to use the content. I think a lot of times we've noticed, especially in India, that people are able to just, because you've shared something on Facebook and shared the article or a photograph on Facebook, that they're able to save it and then come up with this line that, oh, it was shared widely on social media, so we thought it was okay to use it. And we faced this with a commercial brand. They actually just used it part of their Instagram, not to sell anything, but as part of a curated campaign. And this is the best argument that they could come up with. So I think there's a lot around license awareness, social media image use, and just a general understanding of how we have to use images with permission. When we use images from museums that are copyright or protected, we try to ask them for permission. We try to put it in a graphic so that even if someone was to take it, it wouldn't be in the right resolution. There's a lot that goes in behind that. But at the end of the day, if someone wants to take a picture and use it without permission, they're still able to do it. So I think we are more now trying to push museums to go open and allow for open access, so that at least the government museums, which are a majority of India's museums, which fall under state or the central government, we believe that these are our cultural heritage collections that belong to everybody, and that they should be they're in public domain and they should be allowed for you to use, and that appropriate license should be given out. That's another part of our work, but yeah, that's all. Yeah.
Yeah, and so for us, I think, like Caitlin mentioned, because we are working with materials in Transcription Center that come from over 19 different repositories across our massive institution, each of the teams that stewards those collections manages copyright for their own materials. We do get a lot of questions about copyright at Transcription Center, but we redirect those directly to our colleagues that manage those types of processes and permissions. The Smithsonian also does have an open access site, and that is sort of a collection of all of our CC0 materials. And some of our transcribed collections are there on the open access site in our CC0, but that is not a process that Caitlin or I manage.
Yeah, and we also have, like Medhavi said, our own overarching terms of use that apply to everything at the Smithsonian. And we have that terms of use linked on the Transcription Center site and in all of our projects and PDFs of completed projects that allow for any sort of educational use. And again, our stuff isn't in that highest resolution TIFF to be published anyway, but everything is available for educational use or reuse. But, you know, like, as Emily said, we sort of forward on sort of larger questions about actual publication, et cetera, to the units who are stewarding those collections.
Thank you. I think we have a similar question about reuse of data sets, and I think it's this for the Smithsonian team. Do you make the resulting data sets available online for reuse? And could you give some more examples of how the transcribed data has been used internally?
Absolutely. So it's a little bit complicated, but the short version is that because of the way the Transcription Center was built internally, it does speak again in constant communication on the back end and the front end with our online Smithsonian databases. So what that means is that those digital assets of those original documents are pulled into Transcription Center and are constantly connected with the transcription themselves. So the transcription is never detached from the original image. And then what that means on the sort of end, after transcriptions are completed, is that it's a really automatic process. So Emily or I, nor the units have to manually update things within 10 minutes of a page or an entire project being completed, which means it's transcribed and reviewed by our digital volunteers. it then becomes visible alongside that digital asset in our online databases and becomes text searchable across those online databases. So it's really automatic. So we're not having to sort of manually update that data. And it is used, so we only know what we know, but we do know from our internal colleagues and from external researchers the sort of different ways that people are stumbling upon these materials because they're more discoverable, more open, more unlocked on a deeper level because people can keyword search in our databases and find collections on a deeper level. But then we also know that some transcribed data is used by our curators for exhibits or is used by our kind of internal staff or external researchers to find specific information about an individual or about a topic or about a time period, is used in publications, is used in different research projects, etc. So we could sort of go on and on about that, but that's the very, very summarized version of how it works in Transcription Center. And if anybody ever has questions and wants to see a more detailed view of that, you can always email us.
Thank you, Caitlin. And so I think that covers also Ian Watson's question about the accuracy. But Ian, if you'd like to ask the question, if you meant something else about accuracy, please do elaborate that. Otherwise, perhaps we can, I don't know if you, Caitlin or Emily, would like to comment on accuracy on the Smithsonian site.
I would actually, because this is a new issue for us. So before 2020, we didn't have really any issues at all related to accuracy. We understand, of course, whenever people are doing the work, that means that there are going to be small mistakes. But again, I described what our volunteer community looked like for a very long time. There were people who were, this is not to say that our community doesn't have this same view today, but it was exclusively people who had a strong interest in developing the best content possible because of their backgrounds and because of their interest in the content, right? As our community has grown, one of our growing pains has been managing accuracy. We've seen increased mistakes as we see more newer users. And that is something that, if I'm being honest with everyone here, we are still learning how to manage. We've developed some kind of technical back-end ways of flagging errors where I'll get notifications when things are being done in a way that our system can detect so that I can reach out directly to people and help give them some guidelines on how to kind of reorient their work. We also rely on that core group of volunteers who are extremely well versed in the way that these transcriptions should be formatted and in the content itself. And we rely on our colleagues across the Smithsonian who manage these materials. It really is a massive group effort to constantly be having and reevaluating these conversations about what it is that we're looking for out of transcribed content and how we can keep getting it closer and closer and closer to perfect, while realizing that we never will quite reach perfect for as long as it's us people doing it, right? But I will say one more thing about accuracy, and Caitlin is really great about saying this every time this question comes up. Every single, even if we produce a transcription that has a lot of errors or a lot of mistakes, every single word that's transcribed is making these collections more searchable, right? Which is getting more eyes on them, which is allowing us to better and better correct those errors. So we think it's really important to talk about the fact that, you know, every single little word transcribed matters and helps us to get this material out there. And the nice thing about Transcription Center is that nothing is ever completely closed. We can endlessly reopen and make edits to transcriptions, which means we can always be working together to improve those results and the content that we're producing. So thank you for asking that question.
Would you like to follow up, Ian, or was it clear?
I think that was really helpful. I think it was really about working at scale. Obviously, at Smithsonian, you're working at a massive scale, but equally, you've got some substantial resources to do some of that checking, whereas many smaller organizations maybe would really struggle with that checking resource. So I think that was what interested me, how you do that at scale. That was a helpful answer. Thank you.
Well, and I will say that even with, you know, the sort of support from our amazing community of volunteers and our amazing colleagues, we're still a team of two, and we're only a team of one for the first 7 years of Transcription Center. And so it's absolutely impossible, even with the best of intentions and goals and productivity, to review every single page from, produced by 14,000 plus digital volunteers and now 54,000 plus digital volunteers. And it's the same for the unit. So the Smithsonian is massive and we have incredible resources, but every single archives or library or museum department is also a tiny team. And so we absolutely don't have the capacity to review and look through pages. And so we really do depend on the community of volunteers to help us. And, what we've seen, as Emily said, even with this uptick in mistakes with the pandemic and the amount of new users we've gotten, shows us that the volunteer review process works because our, sort of dedicated volunteers are continuously communicating with us and helping us monitor that. So, without them, we wouldn't be able to sort of keep up with that. So all of that is just to say for all of these smaller teams out there, don't feel like just because you're not the Smithsonian, like the Smithsonian also doesn't have the capacity all the time. And that's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It's just the reality of cultural heritage organizations. And, I think that the key is collaboration and figuring out what works for you.
Okay.
Thank you. But now we have a very existential, I guess, question by Claire Davis Watford, and maybe Medhavi, you can start. What plans do you have for the future? So that's, if you have to take some time to think through it, do it.
This is something that I think of every day, but the plans almost keep changing all the time. But I think something that we are working towards right now, as of now, is an open access project where we are trying to put together everything Indian art related that is open from across glams of the world. The broader idea is to sort of work out something at the intersection of digital storytelling so that all of these can be used to tell stories by art historians, by upcoming art historians, students, teachers, the general public, if they want to tell a story, used by members of the media. That's the broader idea, really, to make this collection stand out and be in one place. That's something that we're working towards. What we're also working towards is seeing how we can support institutions in hosting these exhibitions, etc., and driving dialogue, looking at public participation and public engagement based on the different exhibitions they are hosting. So those are the two things broadly that we are working towards. The open access project is closer to heart, and that's the first thing that we hope that we'll be able to roll out by the end of this year, at least a beta version. So let's see how that goes. Yeah.
Thanks. What about the Smithsonian's future?
It's a great question. Right now, we're focused on maintaining and meeting our ever-growing community. But we have lots of plans for the future. We are continuing in 2019. We were the first federal crowdsourcing project to launch transcription of audio recordings. And we are planning to work on the development of video captioning and transcribing in the next few years, as well as possibly the inclusion and development of other kinds of crowdsourcing tasks in Transcription Center to sort of meet the needs of our internal and external communities and larger questions of accessibility here in the Smithsonian for our web digitized collection content. But we, of course, are also always looking towards our digital volunteers and our internal colleagues to sort of brainstorm new ideas and needs as they arise and sort of develop new kinds of digital engagement strategies. I know, like I said before, we're definitely going to walk away from this conversation and think about ideas. We did just develop a strategic plan, though, which was really exciting for the next 4 years in Transcription Center that, again, focuses a lot on figuring out how Transcription Center can help with these larger web accessibility questions and work more to sort of enrich and engage all of our volunteers on a sort of successful and meaningful level. So yeah, stay tuned.
Thank you. I guess I have a question that's a little less, is a little more practical for thinking of our future as a program and how we should start to think of ways of engaging users. And so you both used a way of describing your users that I think it's very close. But so Medhavi, you called them experience seekers, whereas Caitlin, I think you called them curious learners. So do you think it's more useful for a program like ours to start thinking in terms of user behaviors rather than user types? So not thinking really about, are we targeting students, are we targeting researchers, or is it the general public? Is it better to think of what people want rather than who they are and how they identify as users? Is that a winning strategy?
I think going forward, user behavior segmented also according to who the user is going to matter. Because I think for us, what we've seen is it's also the use of platforms. Which set of users use which platforms to access what kind of content, whether they download it, whether they, keep it in the pocket, whether they go onto Reddit to have a different conversation around it. I think the user behavior also really, for us, it has been who the user has been and then tracking the user behavior. So yeah, that has mattered. But initially when we started, it was largely the user behavior because we didn't know how to really keep segmenting it all across also. It's only later that the feedback forms, etc., started doing the rounds, and then people started to share what their occupation is and how they use the content, how they save it. So I think that sort of told us about the user type as well. So
would you do it differently now that with learning how you've done it? Would you do it the other way around, or do you think it's a good idea to stick to user identity and then move to user behaviors?
I think with each piece it's different. Where everything now with the open GLAM thing, I think the new platform, the digital storytelling, we're going with user behavior, because again we do not know who all will use it. I mean, yes, we hope that a lot of creators use it, but within creators also there's a huge, I mean, when we participated in Hack for Glam last year, we put out all the open access materials to see what would come of it. And someone actually created a 3D object out of a painting, which is something unexpected. We didn't know that could be created as well, right? So I think given these experiences, now we're just going to go with seeing what has been created and what people are likely to sort of respond to, rather than go with user types, because then we'd just be restricting the kind of content we produce and the kind of experience we want to give out then.
Thanks.
I think too, the biggest lesson for us, I agree with everything that Medhavi just said, but I think too, the biggest lesson for us that we constantly talk about is I think it's really important to have some general goals and expectations outlined when you're starting any sort of project like this. But I also think that it's really important not to be too rigid or inflexible on those goals or their expectations, because as we've all seen and continue to see, you're going to have unexpected surprises in good and bad ways. And if you are sort of inflexible or unadaptable, then you're going to miss out on some really interesting opportunities. So like, as Emily was saying, like we never expected for high school students or for corporations to be engaging with Transcription Center in the way that they have in the past year. And we never designed Transcription Center to meet the needs of corporations, right? And we aren't necessarily still doing that. But by allowing ourselves to sort of pivot and kind of think more critically about what we're hearing from our public and these new types of public users, and meeting them where they are, we're really expanding our opportunities internally and externally to learn and collaborate in new ways that benefit us. So when we look at corporations as one example, we have been able to over the past year sort of grow our partnerships and our relationships with new internal teams in the Smithsonian, like our advancement teams and our public affairs teams that we weren't necessarily engaging with before, that taught us new things about reaching audiences and getting more resources for Transcription Center that we had never thought about before. And that was a real opportunity that if we hadn't seized that, we would have missed that. And by sort of engaging with these new audiences, preferences and being flexible in what our sorts of goals for who our users were and the kinds of behavior that they were going to have, and allowing for that to change, we have been able to kind of grow our community and learn new things and adopt new things that have benefited our existing users and the ones that we thought we were going to be engaging with, and these new unexpected users. So I think that it's what's most important of all is to allow your community to develop as it develops and sort of respond to that in an appropriate way. That, again, still aligns with your mission and your goals, but can change a little bit over time.
Emma, did you want to add anything?
I was going to say the exact same thing that Caitlin said, probably because we talk about this all the time. But yeah, whatever approach you take for building your audience, just make sure that you are always taking the time to then look at who actually is on here and what are they actually doing, though. And I think Medhavi's presentation was so good at illustrating the sort of like unexpected little things that get produced whenever you sort of allow that to flourish and you pay attention to, how people are interacting with your site. Because once you open things up to that massive community of anyone in the world with internet access, people are going to bring their own creativity and their own ideas to the table, and it could very well turn out to be something that you never expected.
Thank you. So I guess another aspect that you both mentioned quickly is this. I guess the coexistence of physical engagement and digital engagement, which was probably much more prominent before the pandemic, and then it became all about digital engagement. I know this webinar is about digital engagement, but what do you see that the future holds? Do you think that the digital and the physical will continue to coexist, and do you think they will complement one another, or do you think that the digital will always be seen as sort of a surrogate of a replacement of the physical experience? What are your thoughts on this?
I certainly hope it continues for GLAMs to coexist because I think there's a whole new audience that has grown used to content from museums that are not in their city, and it would be terrible if they didn't receive that kind of content later. I'm already seeing this a lot because I know that now that exhibitions are allowed and museums are opening up, there are these questions that pop up on social media. Oh, I'm not in that city. Will you have will you have like a live stream of the event? And then there's a blank comment space there. There's no response there. So I certainly do hope that that continues to happen, because I think we've led audiences to feel that there is a vast array of cultural content that is there. There is an audience that is wanting to contribute to this and not just consume it. I think we need to also continue to remember that there is also a set of audience anywhere in the world who wants to contribute. So not just attending events and all, but how can they be part of your team? I think it's wonderful to see the Smithsonian transcription process have so many digital volunteers. It's an inspiring example for all GLAMs, I think, to also see how they can involve these people, because I think everywhere we notice that GLAMs museums are short-staffed for so many things. So I think it would be in so many departments, it would be interesting to see how we continue to use the power of digital. As far as the Heritage Lab goes, I think we are looking forward to complementing our digital work now at museums. Seeing how, and I think the next thing that we are doing is actually a teacher's hack at a physical exhibition, and then continuing it online, and then opening up the entire resource to teachers who are going to be unable to attend the physical actual exhibition. So yeah, I think we are going to try to experiment with both and see and hope that there are newer formats to explore as well.
Yeah, and I would just say that, the digital will never be able to replace the in-person experience, both on an interpersonal level, right? I think we've all learned a lot about the value of digital interaction and also the value of legitimate face-to-face interaction, as some of those options have been taken away from us over the last year. But also in terms of sort of cultural heritage and museum content in general, my background is in museum anthropology and material culture. I will always feel very strongly that there is a value in being with these materials in a physical space that cannot be replicated in any other way. But what the digital offers is a totally different type of engagement, right? And the way that we usually have these conversations is about which is better. And I hope that we're all moving towards a place of just acknowledging that they're different and that they should work together, right? And Caitlin and I have learned so much about how the digital makes a lot of sense for what we do at Transcription Center, but the things that are done, but there are other teams at the Smithsonian who are managing those materials for whom it might make sense to do in-person sorts of engagements, right? And if we're all kind of working together to make those connections and to make sure that all of our bases are covered. Everybody learns in different ways. Everybody has different abilities. And the more sort of diverse approaches that we are taking, and the more that we are collaborating with people who have different approaches from us across the physical and the digital, the better we're meeting everybody's needs and creating connections between as many people as possible with the collections that we have. So yeah, I don't know what's the future for Transcription Center in terms of finding that balance. I guess we'll see once this is all like over, right? But yeah, I just hope that we are all thinking all the time about how these different pieces work together and how we can maximize that.
Thank you. That's something that we have clearly in mind for the program. Of course, we're supposed to build a virtual national collection, so that's the focus. But I think that it cannot be, detached, as you said, from the physical. So, Caitlin, I saw that you unmuted.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say that I think too, one of the things that has surprised us, obviously everything about Transcription Center is like digital in essence, but I think that there is this sort of assumption that a virtual engagement or a virtual activity is a little bit less personal or intimate, and in some ways they can be, right? You can't get back that physical touch of an object or an archival document, but one thing that has really surprised us is the feedback that we have gotten from surprised volunteers who are participating maybe for the first time in Transcription Center on their own or as part of these transcribe-a-thons that we've done virtually, and have noted to us how personal and intimate it feels to be able, in a way that you wouldn't get, right? Like I know many of us working in the cultural heritage world have done instruction sessions or tours of archival materials or collections objects. And there's something really intimate and personal about that. But by looking by yourself or with a group of people at a screen in your own home, in your pajamas, and being able to zoom in on a sentence or a word of somebody's handwriting about their experience in 1872, is incredibly personal and intimate, and is kind of a deeper experience than you would get from just seeing a letter on a table that you wouldn't necessarily be able to take the time to engage with that sort of deeply, just sort of being in a museum space, right? We're not supposed to touch all of the documents on a tour necessarily, right? And so I think, that has really been a joyful thing for us to get that feedback from a lot of these new users of saying like, wow, I didn't realize how much I would like this. And I didn't realize how intimate and personal this was. And that I could get that at home virtually by not going into the Smithsonian. And so I think that that's something too that we sort of need to explore as an institution and as cultural heritage organizations, is like, again, putting these things in collaboration, conversation with each other, and, sort of prioritizing both kinds of engagements, but recognizing the value in both in different ways.
And I guess that's an excellent piece of advice to close our webinar. It's 3:29, so I think we've done pretty well. Just wanted to thank you very much, all of our speakers. It's been extremely helpful for us as a program. I hope it was as helpful for you and for the audience. And so I hope we'll keep in touch because we are planning on having more of these events with international collaborators, and we are hoping to keep in touch in general because I think that it will be instrumental for us to keep talking to people that have more experience and that have been through this, so they can tell us all about what to avoid and what to risk. And so I want to thank you so much, and thank you all of you who attended.
Thank you, everyone. This was lovely.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And reach out anytime. Like